14. Levin looked straight before him, and saw the herd of cattle, and then a strap, and his horse Raven, and the coachman who, having driven up to the cattle, was speaking to the herdsman. After that, close by, he heard the sound of wheels and the snorting of a well-fed horse. But he was so engrossed in his thoughts that he did not wonder why the coachman was coming for him. That occurred to him only when the coachman drove up and called to him. "The mistress has sent me. Your brother and another gentleman have come." Levin got into the trap and took the reins. As if just awakened from a dream, it was long before he could collect his thoughts. He looked at the well-fed horse, leathered between the legs and on its neck, where the reins chafed it. Looked at Ivan the coachman sitting beside him, and remembered that he had been expecting his brother, that his wife was probably disturbed at his long absence, and tried to guess who the visitor that had come with his brother might be. His brother, his wife, and the unknown visitor appeared in a different light to him now. It seemed to him that his relations with everyone would now be changed. There will be no disputes. With Kitty, never any quarrels again. With the visitor, whoever he may be, I shall be amiable and kind. And with the servants, with Ivan, everything will be different. Tightly holding in the good horse, who snorted impatiently and pulled at the reins, Levin kept turning to glance at Ivan, who sat beside him not knowing what to do with his unoccupied hands, and continually pushing down his shirt as the wind blew it out. Levin tried to think of some pretext for beginning a conversation with him. He wanted to say that it was a pity Ivan had pulled the saddle girth so tight, but that would have sounded like a reproof, and Levin desired an amicable conversation. But he could think of nothing else to say. "Bear to the right, sir. There's a stump there," said the coachman, taking hold of the rein. "Please leave it alone and don't teach me," said Levin, annoyed at the coachman's interference. Just as it always did, interference vexed him, and he immediately felt how wrong had been his conclusion that his spiritual condition could at once alter his manner when confronted with reality. When they were still a quarter of a verst from the house, Levin saw Grisha and Tanya running toward him. "Uncle Kostya! Mama is coming, and Grandpapa, and Sergei Ivanitch, and someone else," they cried, clambering into the trap. "Who else?" "An awfully dreadful man, and he goes like that with his hands," said Tanya, standing up in the trap and mimicking Katavazov. "Young or old?" asked Levin with a laugh, as Tanya's gestures reminded him of someone. "Oh, if only it is not someone disagreeable," he thought. As soon as he had turned the corner of the road and saw those who were approaching, he at once recognized Katavazov in a straw hat, waving his arms just as Tanya had represented. Katavazov was very fond of talking about philosophy, having a conception of it which he had acquired from naturalists who had never studied it, and in Moscow Levin had latterly had many disputes with him. One of those disputes, in which Katavazov evidently thought he had been the victor, was the first thing Levin remembered when he recognized him. "But I will not now on any account dispute or express my opinions lightly," he thought. After alighting from the trap and welcoming his brother and Katavazov, Levin asked where Kitty was. "She has taken Mitya to Kolok," which was a wood not far from the house. "She wanted to let him sleep there. It's so hot in the house," said Dolly. Levin always advised his wife not to take the child into the wood, considering it dangerous, and this news was disagreeable to him. "She wanders about with him from place to place," said the old prince with a smile. "I advised her to try taking him to the ice cellar." "She meant to come to the apiary. She thought you were there. We are going there," said Dolly. "Well, and what are you doing?" asked Koznichev, lagging behind with his brother. "Ah, nothing particular. Busy with the estate as usual," answered Levin. "Have you come for a good stay? We expected you long ago." "For about a fortnight. I had a lot to do in Moscow." At these words, the brothers' eyes met, and Levin, in spite of the desire he always felt, and now more than ever, for friendly and especially for simple relations with his brother, felt ill at ease while looking at him. He dropped his own eyes, not knowing what to say. mentally reviewing the subjects that might interest Koznichev and divert him from the Serbian War and a Slavonic question, at which he had hinted when mentioning his work in Moscow. Levin asked about Koznichev's book. "Have any reviews of your book appeared?" he asked. Koznichev smiled at the obvious intent of the question. "No one concerns himself with it, and I least of all," he replied. "Look there, Darya Alexandrovna. It's going to rain," he added, pointing with his umbrella to some white clouds that had appeared above the aspen trees. And those words were enough to re-establish between the brothers the not exactly hostile but cold relations which Levin so wished to avoid. Levin joined Katavasov. "How right you were to come," he said. "I've long been meaning to. Now we'll have some talks, and we'll see. Have you read Spencer?" "No, I've not finished him," replied Levin. "However, I don't need him now." "How's that? That's interesting. Why not?" "Well, I've finally convinced myself that I shan't find solutions of the questions I'm concerned about in him or in the people of his kind. Now—" But he was suddenly struck by the calm and cheerful expression of Katavasov's face. I felt so sorry to lose the spiritual condition which he was evidently spoiling by his conversation, that, recollecting his resolution, he ceased speaking. "However, we'll have a talk later on," he said. "If we are going to the apiary, it's this way, along this path," he added, addressing the whole party. When by the narrow footpath they had reached the unmown glade, covered on one side by a thick growth of bright John and Marys, with tall spreading bushes of dark green sneezewort between them, Levin asked his guests to sit down in the deep cool shade of the young aspens, upon a bench and some tree stumps, specially arranged for visitors to the apiary, who might be afraid of bees, while he went to the hut to fetch bread, cucumbers, and fresh honey for the grown-up people, as well as for the children. Trying to make as few brusque movements as possible, and listening to the bees that flew past him more and more often, he went along the path to the hut. At the very entrance, a bee became entangled in his beard and began buzzing, but he carefully liberated it. He went into the shady lobby, and from a peg in the wall took down his veil, put it on, and with his hands deep in his pockets, entered the fenced-in apiary, where, standing in regular rows and tied with bast to stakes, in the middle of a space where the grass had been mown, stood the old beehives, every one familiar to him, and each with a history of its own, while along the wattle fence stood the new hives, with the swarms hived that year. In front of the hives, flickering before his eyes, and circling and fluttering over the same spot, played bees and drones. And between them flew the working bees, always to or from the wood with the blossoming lime trees, fetching and bringing back their loads. In his ears rang incessantly a variety of sound, now of a busy working bee flying swiftly past, now of a buzzing idle drone, then of the excited bee sentinels, guarding their treasure from a foe and prepared to sting. On the other side of the fence, an old man was making a hoop, and did not notice Levin, who stopped in the middle of the apiary without calling him. He was glad of this opportunity to be alone and recover from reality, which had already so lowered his spiritual condition. He remembered that he had already got angry with Ivan, treated his brother coldly, and spoken heedlessly to Katavasov. Can it possibly have been but a momentary mood that will pass without leaving a trace? He wondered. But at that instant, returning into that mood, he felt with joy that something new and important had occurred within him. Reality had temporarily veiled the spiritual tranquillity he had found, but it remained with him. Just as the bees, now circling round him, threatening him and distracting his attention, deprived him of complete physical calm and forced him to shrink to avoid them, so the cares that had beset him from the moment he got into the trap had deprived him of spiritual freedom. But that continued only so long as they surrounded him, and as, in spite of the bees, his physical powers remained intact, so his newly realized spiritual powers were intact also. 15. "Kostya, "Do you know with whom Sergei Ivanitch travelled coming here?" said Dolly, after she had distributed cucumbers and honey among the children. "With Vronsky. He's on his way to Serbia." "Yes, and not alone, but has taken a squadron at his own expense," said Katavazov. "That is like him," said Levin. "But are volunteers really still going?" he added, with a glance at Koznichev. Koznichev did not reply, but with the blunt side of a knife carefully extracted from a bowl in which lay a wedge of white honeycomb, a live bee that had stuck in the running honey. "Yes, I should think so. He should have seen what went on at the station yesterday," said Katavazov, audibly biting into a cucumber. "Well, how is one to understand it? In heaven's name, Sergei Ivanitch, explain to me where all these volunteers are going, and whom they are fighting," said the old prince, evidently continuing a conversation that had been started during Levin's absence. "The Turks," answered Koznichev, quietly smiling, having extracted the bee which, black with honey, moved its legs helplessly as he shifted it from the knife to a firm aspen leaf. "But who has declared war on Turkey?" "Ivan Ivanitch Ragozov and the Countess Lydia Ivanovna, assisted by Madame Stahl." "No one has declared war, but people sympathize with their suffering neighbors and wish to help them," replied Koznichev. "But the prince is not talking of help," interposed Levin, taking his father-in-law's side, "but of war. He says that private people cannot take part in war without the consent of the government." "Kostya, look, here's a bee. Really, we shall get stung," cried Dolly, waving away a wasp. "But that's not a bee, it's a wasp," said Levin. "Well, and what is your theory?" asked Katavazov with a smile, evidently challenging Levin to a discussion. "Why have private individuals no right?" "My theory is this. On the one hand, war is such a bestial, cruel, and terrible affair that no single man, not to speak of a Christian, can take on himself personally the responsibility for beginning a war. It can only be done by a government, which is summoned to it and is brought to it inevitably. On the other hand, by law and by common sense, in the affairs of state, and especially in the matter of war, citizens renounce their personal will." Koznichev and Katavazov, ready with their rejoinders, began speaking both together. "That's just the point, my dear fellow, that cases may arise when the government does not fulfill the will of its citizens, and then society announces its own will," said Katavazov. But Koznichev evidently did not approve of this reply. He frowned at Katavazov's words and said something different. "It is a pity you put the question that way. There's no declaration of war in this case, but simply an expression of human, Christian feeling. Our brothers by blood and religion are being killed. Well, say they were not even our brothers or co-religionists, but simply children, women and old people. One's feelings are outraged, and Russians hasten to help to stop those horrors. Imagine that you were going along a street and saw a tipsy man beating a woman or a child. I think you would not stop to ask whether war had or had not been declared against that man, but you would rush at him and defend the victim." "But I would not kill the man," replied Levin. "Yes, you would." "I don't know. If I saw such a thing, I might yield to my instinctive feeling. I can't say beforehand. But there is no such instinctive feeling about the oppression of the Slavs, nor can there be." "Perhaps you have none, but others have," said Koznichev with a dissatisfied frown. "Among the people there live traditions of Orthodox Christians suffering under the yoke of the infidel Mussulman. The people have heard of their brothers' sufferings and have spoken out." "Perhaps," said Levin evasively, "but I don't see it. I myself am one of the people, and I don't feel it." "Nor do I," said the prince. "I was living abroad and read the papers, and must own that I could not at all understand why, even before the Bulgarian atrocities, all Russians suddenly grew so fond of their Slavonic brothers, while I don't feel any love for them. I was much grieved, and thought I was a monster, or that the Carlsbad waters had that effect on me. But on getting back I was relieved, for I see that there are others besides me who are only interested in Russia and not in their brother Slavs. Constantine is one. Personal opinions don't count in this matter, said Koznetchev. It is not an affair of personal opinions, when all Russia, the people, has expressed its will. But forgive me, I don't see it. The people know nothing about it, said the prince. Oh, Papa, don't they? And on Sunday in church, remarked Dolly, who had been following the conversation. Please bring a towel, she said to the old man, who was looking smilingly at the children. It's impossible at all. But what was there in church on Sunday? The priest was ordered to read it. He did so. The people understood nothing, but they sighed as they always do during a sermon, continued the prince. They were told that there would be a collection in the church for a soul-saving object, so they each took out a kopeck and gave it. But what it was for, they did not know. The people can't help knowing. A consciousness of their destiny always exists in the people, and at moments like the present, it becomes clear to them, said Koznetchev positively, glancing at the old beekeeper. The handsome old man, with a black beard turning grey in places, and thick silvery hair, stood motionless with a bowl of honey in his hand, gazing kindly and calmly down from his height at the gentlefolk, clearly neither understanding them, nor wishing to understand. That's just so, he said to Koznetchev, and moved his head significantly. Yes, you'd better ask him. He neither knows nor thinks about it, said Levin. Have you heard about the war, Mikhailich? He asked, addressing the old man. What they read in the church. What do you think? Ought we to fight for the Christians? Why should we think? Alexander Nikolaevich, the Emperor, has thought for us, and will think for us on all matters. He can see better. Shall I bring some more bread and give the laddie a bit? He asked Dolly, pointing to Grisha, who was finishing his crust. I have no need to ask, said Koznetchev. We have seen and still see hundreds and hundreds of men who give up everything to serve the righteous cause, and who come from all ends of Russia and openly and clearly express their thoughts and aims. They bring their mites, or go themselves, and say straight out why they do it. What does that mean? It means, it seems to me, said Levin, beginning to get excited, that in a nation of 80 million, there can always be found not hundreds, as is now the case, but tens of thousands of men who have lost their social position, happy-go-lucky people who are always ready to go. Into Pugachev's robber band, or to Khiva, or to Serbia. I tell you it's not hundreds, and not the happy-go-lucky people, but the best representatives of the people, said Koznetchev, as irritably as if he were defending the last of his possessions. And the donations? There, at any rate, the whole people directly express its will. That word people is so indefinite, said Levin. Clerks in district offices, schoolmasters, and 1 out of 1,000 peasants may know what it is all about. The rest of the 80 millions, like Mikhailich, not only don't express their will, but have not the least idea what it is they have to express it about. What right have we, then, to say it is the will of the people? (16) Koznetchev, an experienced dialectician, did not rejoin, but immediately turned the conversation into another region. Well, if you want to gauge the national spirit arithmetically, of course that is very difficult to do. Voting has not been introduced in our country, and cannot, because it does not express the people's will. But there are other means. It is felt in the air, it is felt by the heart. Not to mention the undercurrents that have stirred in the motionless sea of the nation, and which are evident to every unprejudiced person. Look at society in the narrower sense. The most divergent parties in the intellectual world, previously so hostile to one another, have all merged into one. All differences are at an end, and all the social organs say one and the same thing. All have felt an elemental force that has seized them and carries them all in one direction. Yes, all the papers say the same thing, said the prince. That's true. So much the same that they are just like frogs before a storm. They prevent our hearing anything else. Frogs or no frogs, I don't publish a newspaper and don't want to defend them. But I am speaking of the unanimity of the intelligent world, said Kosnichev, turning to his brother. Levin was going to reply, but the old prince interrupted him. About that unanimity, something else can be said, rejoined the prince. There's my son-in-law, Stephen Arkadyevitch. You know him. He has now got the post of member of the committee of a commission of something or other. I don't remember. Anyhow, there's nothing to do there. Well, Dolly, it's no secret. And the salary is 8,000. You just ask him if his work will be any use, and he will prove to you that it is most necessary. And he is a truthful man, but one can't help believing in the usefulness of 8,000 roubles. Yes, he asked me to tell Darya Alexandrovna that he has got the post, said Kosnichev discontentedly, considering that what the prince was saying was not to the point. So it is with the unanimity of the press. It has been explained to me. As soon as there is a war, their revenue is doubled. How can they help considering that the fate of the people and the Slavs, and all the rest of it? There are many papers I don't like, but that is unfair, said Kosnichev. I would make only one stipulation, continued the prince. Alphonse Karr put it very well before the war with Prussia. You think war unavoidable? Very well. He who preaches war, off with him in his special legion to the assault, to the attack, in front of everybody else. The editors will be fine, remarked Katavasov, laughing loudly, and picturing to himself the editors of his acquaintance in that chosen legion. Oh, but they run away, said Dolly, and only be a hindrance. And if they run, put grape shot behind them, or Cossacks with whips, said the prince. That is a joke, and excuse me, prince, not a good joke, said Kosnichev. I don't see that it is a joke, that, began Levin, but Kosnichev interrupted him. Every member of society is called upon to do his proper task, he said. A man of thought perform theirs by expressing public opinion. The unanimous and complete expression of public opinion is a service rendered by the press, and is also a gratifying phenomenon. 20 years ago we should have been silent, but now we hear the voice of the Russian people, who are ready to arise as one man and to sacrifice themselves for their oppressed brethren. That is a great step and a sign of power. But it's not a question of sacrificing themselves only, but of killing Turks, remarked Levin timidly. The people sacrifice and are ready to sacrifice for the good of their souls, but not for murder, he added, involuntarily connecting the conversation with the thoughts that so engrossed him. What is that, for their souls? You know that expression is a puzzling one for a naturalist. What is a soul? Katavasov inquired with a smile. Ah, you know. No, I swear I've not the slightest idea, said Katavasov, laughing loudly. I come not to bring peace, but a sword, said Christ, rejoined Kosnichev, from his own standpoint, quoting quite simply, as if it were quite comprehensible, the very passage from the Gospels that always perplexed Levin more than any other. That's just so, repeated the old man, who was standing nearby, answering a glance that was accidentally thrown at him. No, my dear sir, you are beaten, completely beaten, shouted Katavasov merrily. Levin flushed with annoyance, not at being beaten, but because he had not refrained from the dispute. No, I must not dispute with them, he thought. They are clad in impenetrable armour, and I am naked. He saw that it was not possible to convince his brother and Katavasov, and still less did he see any possibility of himself agreeing with them. What they advocated was that same pride of intellect that had nearly ruined him. He could not agree that some dozen of men, among whom was his brother, had the right to assert, on the strength of what they were told by some hundreds of grandiloquent volunteers who came to the city, that they and the newspapers expressed the will and the opinion of the people. An opinion, moreover, which found expression in vengeance and murder. He could not agree with this, because he neither saw the expression of those thoughts in the people among whom he lived, nor did he find any such thoughts in himself, and he could not consider himself as other than one of those who constituted the Russian people. Above all, he could not agree because he, together with the people, did not know and could not know wherein lay the general welfare, but knew definitely that the attainment of this welfare was only possible by a strict fulfillment of the law of goodness which is revealed to every man, and therefore could not desire or preach war for any kind of general aims. He said the same as Mikhailich and the people who expressed their thought in the legend of the invitation to the Varyags. Come and rule over us. We joyfully promise complete obedience. All labours, all humiliations, all sacrifices we take upon ourselves, but we will not judge or decide. But the people now, according to his brother, were announcing that exemption they had purchased at so high a price. He wanted to ask why, if public opinion is an infallible judge, is a revolution and a commune not as lawful as the movement in favour of the Slavs. But all these were thoughts that could not decide anything. One thing could be seen indubitably, namely, that this dispute was irritating his brother at the moment, and that therefore it was wrong to continue it. So Levin ceased to argue, and drew his visitor's attention to the clouds that were gathering, and to the fact that they had better get home before the rain began.